Hello and welcome to the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley. My name is Mitty Chang. I'm the president for this Rotary Club, and I want to welcome you to our club meeting this week. Every week, we bring to you a new program about education, technology, innovation, and humanitarian service. I'm very excited to introduce to you guys one of our members on the call who's going to introduce our guest speaker, which I'm excited about. So without further ado, to my left is our immediate past president, Rushton Hurley. Rushton is giving out peace signs. He is an awesome person working in the field of education. He runs his own nonprofit, which works with teachers and teaches them more about technology. It's called Next Vista. Check it out. He's also been a principal in his past, as well as a Japanese teacher and a slew of many other things. So very interesting guy. Definitely talk to him. Rushton, if you would please introduce our guest speaker, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much, President Mitty. And we are totally jazzed this week to have Carrie Zeidman as our speaker. And how did we get to know Carrie? Well, it's one of those things in the Rotary world, right? So a friend of mine in the Cupertino Club had sent me a note mentioning that Carrie was going to be presenting at her club. I couldn't go because the topic looked so interesting. And so I said, well, let me know. And, she contacted me later and said, yes, she's a great speaker. This is Hung Wei, by the way. Shout out to Hung for the nice connection on this. And this is what happens in Rotary, right? We catch these amazing programs and we share them with others so that other people can be inspired by them. And why are you going to be inspired by Carrie? Because she's got a wonderful story to tell about her work as a commercial artist and then as someone actually pursuing her passion with art. So she has run an outfit she started in the 80s called Elan Studios. And while it does all kinds of commercial art, she also has the opportunity to share all kinds of cool ways that she has found to take her interest in digital art and to apply them to stories that have to do with all kinds of pieces of our history. And I'll let her explain that in far more detail. But Carrie, we are honored to have you as our speaker today. And with that, I put it in your hands. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rushton, and thank you, Mitty. I'm really excited to be here today and to be able to tell you a little bit about my book that I came out with called Ghosts, Images of War. I was a graphic designer for about 25 years, and then about 10 years ago, I decided to go off on my own and do my own thing. And in 2008, what started was I was given the opportunity to go on a trip to Poland and to visit World War II sites and some of the concentration camps and different places in Warsaw and Krakow where things had happened during the war. And I must admit, I was a little apprehensive at first about going on the trip because I tend to be very sensitive to places where tragedies have happened. There always seems to be something that lingers there, and I tend to pick that up. And I kind of do it to myself because I go there and I kind of put myself in the position and try to feel what it would be like to have been back there because history is one of my passions. So I try to be as close as possible by going there and putting myself in that position. So we went there in 2008 and I decided to go ahead and go anyway because I feel like I consider myself a witness to history, and to be a witness to history, you have to go to the places. So I went ahead and went to the different places. And what struck me when I first got there was how pretty some of the sites are, which seemed really wrong to me. And I had seen the images in my head of the photos that I had seen of these places, and the dichotomy of the way they look now and the way they look then gave me the idea for Ghosts. And so I came home and I went through hundreds of photographs and thousands of photographs of my own and historical photographs and created an art series called Ghosts. And I showed that art series in several places, and I got a lot of really good feedback. And at that point, I decided to expand that and cover the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, and World War II, and to put these images into a book. So that's where I will go to my slides. So this is the cover of my book. And so the art series that I did, okay. This is one of the images from the Ghost series, the original Holocaust Ghost series. And what it is it shows the beauty of the place, the green grass, the dandelions, the blue skies. But I wanted to give that shadow of the things that had happened in the tragedy that had happened in the past there. And I did that by creating the shadows of the prisoners on the side of the wall there. So I have these old photos of these places, and they combined with the pictures that I had taken for the art series. So this is another one of the images. This is a square in Krakow where they used to gather the Jews before they would transport them to the camps. And one of the things that I really strove to do with this series was to make the people look like they looked before they were taken away, to be able to connect the viewer to the people and show that they were people just like us. So I really avoided the traditional pictures of the bodies stacked against the walls and the striped pajamas and that sort of thing. I really wanted to be able to connect with them on a human basis as they were when they were free. So this is another one of my images. I try to put people from the present and people from the past kind of subtly interacting with each other, and the viewer can almost see the women walking by there from the past. This image I would put at the end when I would show it, because it shows the two women on the bunk from the past looking at the youth of today, and the youth of today looking away. And this is kind of my message that we really need to pay attention to what has happened in the past so that we don't repeat it. So in the book, I started with the Revolutionary War. So before going to these sites, I was able to research my destinations, where to go, what's still there, where were the interesting stories, and then I'd look for historical photos from the places where I'd go and bring them with me. And whenever possible, I would try to go to the same places. So while I was doing this, just simultaneously, I was researching my family history and doing my genealogy and creating a tree and that sort of thing. And I found that I had people in all of these different conflicts. So that made it a little more real for me. This is the background of the divider for the chapter cover for the Revolutionary War. The background of this is the pension papers for my 5-time great-grandfather. That's genealogy speak for great. And he was in the Revolutionary War. He was in most of the major battles. He was captured and held as a POW by the British. And he was at Valley Forge with George Washington. So that gave it a little more personal touch. And so this is my image from Valley Forge. And just being able to walk around where people like my grandfather Elijah and men like him suffered through the brutal winter of 1777. And they persevered and came out at the end and were able to create a whole new nation. And they fought for that freedom that we enjoy today. That really was profound and special for me. This is in New Jersey, in Manalapan, New Jersey. There's a place called the Old Tenant Church, which I just really loved. It's a pre-Revolutionary War era church and cemetery right near where the Battle of Monmouth was fought. So this is the image that I created of the cemetery there with the Revolutionary War soldiers walking through there. So then for the Civil War, this section was particularly difficult for me because this was the first time that they had cameras, and so they have actual photographs of the soldiers themselves. And to create my images, I would zoom in and crop out the faces and the people. And that was particularly difficult. And knowing that I had ancestors in this war, these images here are the military papers for my 3-time great-grandfather. And in the background is a pardon for a great uncle who received a pardon from the president for fighting on the wrong side of the war. But going in and cropping out these faces, it made me wonder who these people were. They were somebody's husband, father, son. They may have even been related to me. And it was just really hard. And occasionally I had to step away from the computer and give it a day or two and then come back and work on it. So this is the parlor of the McLean House in Appomattox, and in Appomattox, Virginia, where the South surrendered at the end of the war. And I found a really interesting story while I was researching this. In 1861, Wilbur McLean lived in Bull Run, Virginia. So at the beginning of the war, his house was actually used as the headquarters for the Confederate Army. The Battle of Bull Run started when a cannonball struck his house, and attempting to get himself and his family away from the war, he moved to Appomattox, where in 1865, the war ended with the surrender of the South signed in his parlor. So he's been quoted as saying, "The war started in my front yard and ended in my parlor," which was true. So this image, while I was working on the Civil War, walking around these different battle sites, what struck me there was that these were farms and fields and houses, and these battles were fought right there. And what must that have been like to be right there in the middle of it and have a war come right up to your front door? If you were a mother and you had your children, and the people are fighting and killing each other right on your front steps, what would that be like? And then just understanding the sheer scope of the amount of people that were killed in this war. You know, for instance, September 17th, 1862, at the Battle of Antietam, 23,000 young men were either killed, wounded, or missing. And that I just find that staggering. So this is one of my favorite images, actually, but the background of it is my photo. And then the inset photo is a photo that was taken by Alexander Gardner, who was one of the few Civil War photographers at the time. These are the soldiers' bodies that were dragged out after the Battle of Rose Woods, and they were awaiting burial, and the photo was taken at that point. When I was in Gettysburg, I stood on this very spot with this photo in my hand, and it was almost like going back in time and just to be able to stand on the same spot where that photo was taken. And it was interesting was that the advancements in the field of photography at the time had a great impact on the people back home also. This was the first time that it allowed people to experience what the carnage of war really looked like, and that really had an impact on society at the time. So then we move on to World War I. I had relatives in this war also. I had a great uncle who kept the supply trains running in France, and another great uncle who was fighting in the trenches. And I was happy to find that they both lived and went on to live long, happy lives. The documents in the background here are their papers. So we went to the northern France, southern Belgian border, an area called the Western Front. And this is one of my images from the forests of Flanders there. And it's almost like the girls walking by almost sense that something had happened in that forest. And then I also wanted to include the red poppies, which are the symbol of World War I in Europe. This is my image of the trench fighting, which was really unique to World War I. And these men would live in these trenches for weeks at a time. And if they lived, they'd get a little bit of time off before they would be back in these trenches. And it was another area where the terrain there looks very different than it did at the time. During the war, there was nothing but mud and burnt tree stumps and poison gas and dead bodies and rats. I mean, it was just like hell on earth. And these men lived in that. But now you go there and it's just really beautiful and lush. There's just grass and wildflowers and trees, and it's just a really beautiful place. But if you look closely, you can still see the scars of World War I all this time later. There's ditches where the trenches used to be. There's remnants of an old aqueduct that they used to bring the water to the men in the trenches and supply them. There's shrapnel sticking out of the ground in different spots. There's old concrete bunkers that you can still see, and some of you can even go in. So if you look very closely, you can still see the scars. But there was also another really interesting thing that I found with World War I. The men there would look up over the edge of the trenches, and so a lot of them were shot in the face. And with the advancements of medical care, a lot of these men would live at the end of the war, and they would have these severe facial deformities. So doctors and artists got together, and they would use these plaster casts of the faces of the men to create tin masks that would match the men's faces and cover their deformities and give them somewhat of a more normal look. This is an example here of, on the left is the man without the mask, and on the right is the same man but wearing the mask, and so he looks much more normal, and it gave them a much more normal life than they would have otherwise had. So I found that really interesting, especially as an artist, that there would be this interesting way of helping these men after they came back. So then the last section that I did was of World War II. And I also had several relatives in this war, but I wanted to pay homage to my husband's family, who had several people in the war also. On the lower right-hand corner is his father, who was stationed in the Philippines before going to Europe as part of the occupying force, helping to organize and rebuild Italy, France, and Germany. And then just to the left of him is his uncle, who was a tail gunner in a B-17 and flew 35 missions over enemy territory and bombing Nazi rail lines and factories. And they both were just amazing what they did in the war. The picture of the man in the middle there is Thomas Meehan, who I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So this is an image from Pearl Harbor. As you know, on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese, and within a few hours, this beautiful island paradise was devastated, and over 2,300 Americans were dead. The USS Arizona was one of the ships that was destroyed and sunk in the attack. And due to the condition of the bodies of the 1,177 sailors and Marines that died on the ship, they made the decision to leave them in the ship. And the Arizona Memorial straddles the remains of the ships in the shallow waters there in Pearl Harbor. And one of the interesting things is that there's a little bit of oil that's still leaking out of the ship to this day, and it's known as the Tears of the Arizona. And if you go there at just the right time of day when the sun hits the water, this oil slick makes this beautiful rainbow patterns on the water. And that is on the water where you can look down and see the ship below underneath it. So this image I did, this is a photograph that I took of the rainbow patterns. But if you look very closely, there's 25 faces of sailors and Marines from the time period into the image, and then I blended them into the waves to be part of the water, which is what I was seeing while I was standing there. And so that was my way of showing what I was thinking and feeling while I was there. So one of the other places we went was in Normandy. So we started out in London, and then we crossed the channel from Portsmouth to the beaches of Normandy and landed there ourselves. So the background picture here is the image that I took as we were coming into Normandy, and then the inset photo is a historical photo from the actual time period. So we had the luxury of coming across on a ferry, but the whole way across, I was thinking what it must have been like for the men who crossed then back in 1941. And I particularly thought about them climbing down the cargo nets from the side of the ships and into these Higgins boats, which were the landing boats there, and coming into shore and hearing the bullets pinging off of that plate on the front of the ship, and knowing that that plate is going to drop down and you're expected to run off this boat and into hell itself. And the courage that it took for them to do that is just, for me, is just staggering. And it's just amazing that what they were able to accomplish there. So this is an image from a little town in Normandy called St. Mary-Glise, which was the first town that was liberated after D-Day. But this was not such an easy task, actually, because the men of the Easy Company parachuted into the main square of town at night. And unfortunately, there was a house in the main square that had caught fire and illuminated them coming down into the square in their parachutes. And the Germans were able to kill many of them. And any of you who've seen the show, the movie The Longest Day, know the story of John Steele, who was one of the paratroopers who was caught on the steeple of the church. And he hung up there for several hours and played dead while he watched his comrades being shot. And the Germans eventually climbed up there to cut him down, realized he was alive, and took him prisoner. But he wasn't prisoner for long because the next day the Allies came in and freed them and liberated this beautiful little town. And they actually have a dummy of John Steele hanging from the steeple to this day, kind of as a touristy thing, which was kind of interesting. So I mentioned Thomas Meehan earlier. He's the man in the center there with the uniform on. And I just want to read a little blurb from my book that I wrote about Thomas Meehan. So this is from my book on the Normandy section of the book. So since the day we arrived in Normandy, our guide, Chris Anderson, had been reading letters to us that were written by First Lieutenant Thomas Meehan III, a member of Easy Company, to his wife Anne at home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Over the time of our tour, we got to know Tom as he described his days before the invasion and his frustration at being away from his beloved wife. Just as we were arriving in St. Mary Glees, Chris read us one final letter from Tom to Anne. Handing the letter out at the door of the plane just before his final flight, Tom wrote, "Dearest Anne, in a few hours I'm going to take the best company of men in the world into France. We'll give the bastards hell. Strangely, I'm not particularly scared, but in my heart is a terrific longing to hold you in my arms. I love you, sweetheart. Forever your Tom." Tom's plane was hit by German anti-aircraft fire and crashed near St. Mary Glees. All on board were killed. 70 years after the fact, we all felt a profound sadness over the death of this young man, lending an even more personal connection to this small French town. So many lives were lost on that day, but the dedication of the soldiers, each a tiny part of this enormous operation, served to free an entire continent from one of the most evil regimes to ever exist and change the world for the better. So it really was a privilege for me to be able to visit these historic spots, and I especially enjoyed learning the stories behind the history. So in closing, I would hope that the reader comes away with a richer knowledge of our history, a respect for those that participated in that history, and an understanding of how past events shape the world we live in today. The people that lived through these events were not just black and white images frozen in time. They were somebody's son, husband, father, or brother that risked their lives to stand against tyranny and justice, not for just our own families, but to protect and bring freedom to oppressed people in every corner of the world. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you.
Carrie, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to our Rotary Club. So we do have I have a few questions, and I think Russian might have a few questions as well.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the process that you go into when you're doing the research for these art pieces, for these stories. And I mean, do you start at a library? Where do you start, and how do you follow that path down to where the point you have that story? And if you could just kind of explain that.
Okay. I usually start by researching the conflict itself, World War I or World War II, find out where the main battles were or where some of the more interesting things happened. And then I would research what's still there. There has to be something there to hang the present on. If everything's gone, then there's not really that ability to put something in the past and the present at the same time. So I try to look for what's still there. What are the more interesting places to go to? I also have what I call my LinkedIn buddies. I have several groups that I belong to on LinkedIn for history and art and military history. And I would send it out to them and say, here's where I'm going. Does anybody have any great ideas? And I get some really great ideas back of some maybe more obscure places. For World War II, I actually had a Pearl Harbor survivor contact me and tell me different places to go, which was really special. And then I look up the photographs of the places that are there, where they were, and try to find the same places. And then I would take those with me on the trip. And then, so I would know where I'm going when I get there, or where I want to go, and then try to find those spots. And finding those spots is really exciting, like walking around St. Mary Glees with photographs of buildings that were hit, or different things that were happening, and be able to find that same spot by matching the architecture or whatever landmarks I can use is really exciting. So that's kind of the process. And then when I come home, I take the photographs that I took, and I take the old photographs, and I go through thousands of photographs and try to match up ones that are going to work well together. And then I just start working on it. And sometimes it comes out how I pictured it at the beginning. Sometimes it changes while I'm working on it and comes out completely different at the end. But I just keep working with it till I'm happy with it. And then that one is finished, and I move on to the next one.
Awesome. What's the most interesting story you've had out in the field while you're traveling and doing your research?
The most interesting story. There were several. One thing that was kind of interesting at the old Tenet church that I mentioned in New Jersey, there's one of the headstones there is broken. And the story behind that headstone is that there was a soldier sitting on that during the Battle of Monmouth, sitting on the headstone, taking a rest, and a stray cannonball came over and hit him and took off his leg, actually. And they dragged him into the church and tried to save his life, and they weren't able to, but there's still blood stains on the pew in the church, which I wasn't able to see because the church wasn't actually open. But one of the cool things was that after I got back, when I was doing research on the family, I found that my 8-time great-grandfather was one of the original owners of Monmouth, New Jersey. There were 12 original owners. And that he had a pew in that church, and some of them were actually buried in that cemetery. So now I have to go back and check it out again. But that was one of the more interesting stories.
Very cool. Rush, I'll turn to you for a question.
Sure. Carrie, I mean, like one of the big things for me is that as an educator and someone interested in technology and its possibilities for education, I'm always interested in what captures attention, right? What gets somebody to go from I'm sitting here in this class, or, I'm just going through my day, whatever it is, to wait a minute, what am I looking at right now? Wait, tell me more, those kinds of moments that essentially allow one to really make a lot of connections quickly. And so, I look at the kind of work that you've done in terms of the digital art, and I'm really interested. Have you worked with teachers in such a way and gotten any feedback from them on how they've used it in classes? I mean, I'm actually quite interested in maybe using a couple of your images, if that's okay, in ways that we can get it out to a lot of teachers and see what they might do with it. So, what experiences have you had with educators using your art?
I actually haven't had any at this point, other than my mother is an educator and we've talked about it, but I would really love to have it in the classrooms, be able to talk to the teachers and the students in the classroom, because one, I feel that a lot of people these days really don't know history the way they should. It's really a shame that they don't. And two, I remember in school, it was mostly memorizing really dry dates and things that happened and that kind of thing. And that really never appealed to me. But I think if you can personalize it somehow, make these people real to the kids, make them understand that they're just like us. They're not just these black and white images that they see in pictures. They're just like you. They feel things. They want to have fun. They want to go be happy. They have family, whatever. And be able to have them relate to the people and then understand what happened to them in a personal sense. Because that's kind of what I do with myself. It's like I'll go there and I think, how would I feel if I was in that position? Like in World War II, I am Jewish. What would it feel like to me to have somebody come up to my door, bang on the door, drag me out of my house and send me to a camp somewhere and take everything I own? What would that feel like? And so I think if you could personalize that to the kids, it makes history much more exciting and interesting to them. And there are some really interesting stories out there. If you could just get them to them, I think the kids would really be hooked on that the way that I am. So I think that's really important, and I would love to be a part of that.
Well, I'd love to work with you on it. I mean, I think that's one of those things, and the personalization of it, the sense that these are people too. Often what happens in run-ups to violence and war is that a group of people has been made the other, made the enemy, made the scapegoat. These are the people that are the problem, right? You hear that kind of thing throughout history. And I mean, to be educated means to essentially know when someone is saying, something like that for their own personal gain or their own group's gain, at the expense of others. And so your imagery is so powerful for helping make that point.
Yeah, I think one thing that's just interesting also is you have to watch out for that being the other part, but at the same time you also have to be vigilant about the people who may actually be a threat. Sometimes in history there's been times where they don't recognize it, and then that is a problem for them also. So it's kind of understanding that, but yeah, you don't just make them the other for no reason, but you do have to watch also for threats that are a threat.
Well
I think that happened in World War II also, is everybody was saying, oh, they're nothing, they're not going to, they're just Nazis, they're not going to hurt anybody. And then this is what happened. So it's very nuanced in history.
Absolutely. The Balkans, the Middle East, the list goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
Turning to the technology a bit, a lot of your work is eye-catching, it's attention capturing, because of the work you've done with digital tools. To that the Gettysburg picture, for example. I mean, so many different shots. The two women on the bunk looking at the at the young person in the room. The two women with the poppies. As they walked, kind of along that path. In all of these cases, you're really bringing a certain excitement about what technology can do to the medium. At what point did that start for you? At what point did you look at digital tools, and instead of saying, this is not the traditional way that photography is done, you thought, whoa, this could be really cool? How did that happen for you?
Pretty much when technology started, it was pretty exciting for me because I was a commercial artist, and I started before we had computers, and we would do paste ups and hand inking and hand painting, and it was much more complicated and cumbersome. And I really hated a lot of the aspects of, like, specking type. I was very terrible at, which is basically guessing if the type is going to fit. And then if it doesn't, you have to wind up cutting it, making it fit on the layout. And so when computers came out, I thought, this is so cool. You can see what you're doing and put it together and move it around and change it. And it's so easy. And so I started playing with it when it first came out. I had a little tiny Mac computer with a little black and white screen. And I've just advanced from that point on. And when digital photography started, this was so exciting for me, because there wasn't that, oh, I only have 24 shots, I can't waste them on this or that. And then once you do take those 24 shots, you send them out and you wait to see what you got when you came back. And sometimes they were good, sometimes not. I've been known to go out for a weekend and shoot 1,600 photographs. I mean, it's not unusual at all, because I change the camera settings while I'm shooting the same thing. I might shoot 50 times with several different settings, because then when I get back, I'll have all these different things to play with. And then it's so, there's just so much you can do, because you have all these really cool tools to work with. And if you meld that with your imagination, there's no limit to what you can do. You can take anything you want and make it into anything you want. Never trust a photograph, because it can be manipulated in so many ways that it's just amazing. I've put people in photographs, taken them out of photographs. I take shots of crowds when I go to different events. I'll take shots of crowds and interesting people that are in the crowds, and they may wind up in one of my images at some point, because I have a whole library of thousands and thousands of people and places and things that I can choose from when I'm putting together an image. And I have the image in my head, and then I just go get my pieces and make them fit how I want them to. And I love the technology, and they're always coming out with new cool toys to play with.
Wonderfully cool stuff. And I know, Mitty, we're probably kind of running down on time there, but I could just keep asking questions. So Mitty, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Carrie, again, thank you so much for speaking to us. I'm going to turn to you pretty shortly for the last words, but again, our guest this week has been Carrie Zeidman, author of Ghosts of War. Very excited to have had her been here talking about her work. Below this video will be a link to her book, as well as a link to more information about her. And if you haven't yet, please make sure to leave a comment at the bottom of this meeting. You can also maybe ask Carrie another question that you might have, and we'll see if Carrie has some time to come respond to some of those comments at the bottom of this meeting during this week. Carrie, and last words.
I just want to thank you both for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it. What I usually like to leave people with is that we're all witnesses to history. History is what's happening right now. History's happened in the past. Just keep your eyes open, understand what's happening, and understand what's happened in the past, because that's going to help us make better decisions in the future. So we all need to pay attention to that. And again, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye now.
Bye.